Daniel Brooks had never imagined that life could become so lonely so quickly. 3 years earlier, he had buried his wife, Emma, after she lost her battle with cancer, leaving him alone to raise their 8-year-old daughter, Sophie. Every morning before sunrise, Daniel worked as a city bus driver, and in the evenings he repaired broken furniture in his tiny garage for extra income. Despite working nearly 16 hours a day, money was always tight. Their little house stood at the edge of town with peeling paint, an old porch, and a leaking roof, but Sophie never complained. She often hugged her father and whispered, "Mom would be proud of you." Those words gave Daniel the strength to keep going. One freezing December evening, while driving home after delivering an old dining table to a customer, Daniel noticed an elderly woman sitting alone on a bus stop bench. Snow had begun falling heavily, and everyone else had already gone home. She wore an elegant wool coat, but it was too thin for the weather. Her silver hair was covered in snowflakes, and a small leather suitcase rested beside her. Several cars passed without stopping. Daniel slowed his truck and rolled down the window. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked gently. The woman looked up with tired blue eyes and managed a weak smile. "I'm fine," she replied softly, though her trembling hands suggested otherwise. "I'm only waiting." Daniel looked around the empty road. "For someone," she hesitated before saying, "perhaps, for kindness." Those words reminded him of Emma, who had always believed that the greatest wealth in life was compassion. Without another thought, Daniel stepped out of the truck. "Come with us. We don't have much, but we have a warm home." The woman looked surprised. "You don't even know me." Daniel smiled. "Sometimes people don't need to know your story before helping you." Sophie leaned out of the passenger seat and waved excitedly. "Please come. Dad makes really good hot chocolate." The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "My name is Margaret." When they reached the little house, Sophie immediately wrapped Margaret in a blanket while Daniel prepared tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. Margaret thanked them repeatedly, treating the simple meal as if it had been served in a luxury hotel. That night Daniel offered her his own bedroom while he slept on the couch. Before going to sleep, Margaret quietly noticed unpaid bills lying on the kitchen table, mortgage notices, utility bills, and hospital debt from Emma's treatment. She understood immediately that the man who had rescued her was struggling to survive himself. Over the next several days Margaret became part of their little family. She helped Sophie with homework, baked delicious apple pies from old family recipes, repaired torn clothes, and filled the once silent house with laughter. Sophie even began calling her Grandma Margaret. Daniel never asked many questions about her past because he respected her privacy. One afternoon, while cleaning the living room, Margaret found an old photograph of Emma. Daniel smiled sadly and explained how his wife had spent her life helping strangers. "She always said kindness is an investment that never loses value," he said. Margaret quietly nodded, hiding tears. She was a wise woman. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in New York City, Victoria Sinclair, CEO of the billion-dollar Sinclair Group, was becoming increasingly desperate. Her 78-year-old mother, Margaret Sinclair, had disappeared after leaving her mansion following an argument. Margaret had grown tired of luxury without love. She wanted to know whether genuine kindness still existed or whether everyone only cared about money and status. Victoria had hired private investigators, helicopters, police departments, and security teams, but no one had found her. News stations offered $1 million reward for information leading to Margaret's safe return. Daniel never watched the news because he spent nearly every waking hour working. He had no idea that the quiet old woman staying in his spare room belonged to one of the richest families in America. A week later, Daniel lost his second job after the furniture workshop where he worked announced bankruptcy. He walked home carrying a small cardboard box with his tools inside, wondering how he would pay the mortgage. Seeing the worry on his face, Margaret quietly handed him an envelope containing several $1,000s. Daniel immediately refused. "I can't take your money." Margaret smiled warmly. "Consider it a loan." Daniel gently placed the envelope back into her hands. "If I accept money from someone I'm helping, then I'm not helping anymore. I'm doing business." Margaret stared at him in amazement. She had spent decades surrounded by wealthy people who always expected something in return. Daniel expected nothing. That evening, Margaret secretly called someone using an old cell phone she had kept hidden in her suitcase. "I'm ready," she said. The next morning, the quiet neighborhood was shaken by the arrival of 6 black luxury SUVs. Security officers stepped out first, followed by an elegant woman wearing a tailored navy coat. The moment she saw Margaret, she burst into tears and ran toward her. "Mother!" she cried. Margaret embraced her daughter tightly. Daniel and Sophie stood frozen in disbelief. Victoria turned toward Daniel. "You're the man who saved my mother." Daniel nodded awkwardly. She needed a warm place to stay. Victoria looked around the modest home and then at the patched roof and worn-out furniture. "Do you know who she is?" Daniel smiled politely. "She's Grandma Margaret." Margaret laughed through her tears. "That may be the nicest title I've ever received." Victoria explained everything, that Margaret Sinclair owned nearly 40% of Sinclair Group, one of the largest companies in the country, and that the family had searched desperately for her. Daniel was speechless. "Why didn't you tell us?" Margaret looked lovingly at Sophie before answering. "Because I wanted someone to see me as a human being instead of a bank account. You never once asked whether I was rich or poor. You simply opened your door." Victoria then handed Daniel a thick envelope. "This contains $1 million as a reward." Daniel looked at it for only a second before shaking his head. "I'm grateful, but I can't accept payment for basic human decency." Even Victoria, a woman known for making billion-dollar negotiations without emotion, struggled to speak. Margaret smiled proudly. "I knew you'd refuse." Instead, she reached into her purse and removed a small folder. "Then allow an old woman to make a different offer." Inside was a deed transferring ownership of Daniel's house to him, completely debt-free. Along with it was a letter appointing him director of the Sinclair Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to helping widows, single parents, veterans, and homeless families. The salary was more than Daniel had ever imagined earning in his lifetime. Daniel looked stunned. "Why me?" Margaret placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "Because charities need kind hearts more than business experts." Money can build buildings, but only compassion can change lives. Months later, Daniel's life looked very different. The leaking roof had been repaired. Sophie attended one of the best schools in the city on a scholarship funded by the foundation, and Daniel spent every day helping struggling families find housing, food, and employment. Yet he never forgot where he came from. Every Friday evening he personally served meals at a homeless shelter, often standing beside Margaret, who volunteered quietly without anyone recognizing her as a billionaire. One snowy evening, nearly a year after they first met, Sophie asked Margaret, "Grandma, why did you really leave your mansion?" Margaret smiled gently before answering, "Because I owned everything money could buy, but I wasn't sure anyone loved me without it. Your father reminded me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, it's measured by the people who open their hearts when they have every reason to keep the door closed." Daniel looked at the two people who had become family and silently thanked Emma for teaching him that kindness never goes to waste. As the snow fell outside, the little house that had once been filled with grief echoed with laughter again. Daniel realized that although one act of compassion had changed his life forever, the greatest gift wasn't the new career, the secure future, or even the financial freedom. It was discovering that a simple decision to help a lonely stranger had given Sophie a grandmother, Margaret a loving family, and himself a reason to believe that miracles still happen, not because of wealth, but because ordinary people choose kindness when no one is watching. Subscribe to my channel.